Welcome to Craving the Heat, where desire takes the lead and every story leaves you wanting more. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest naughty stories. It had been almost 12 years since I last stepped into the hallways of Riverside High. The place was frozen in time in my mind, its long beige corridors, the faint smell of old books, the echo of lockers slamming shut. Back then, Mr. Carter had been my English teacher, strict, well-dressed, with a quiet sort of intensity. He had inspired me to write, to think bigger, to dream beyond the tiny town we lived in. I hadn't thought about him in years until last week. I was at the cafe downtown, reading emails on my laptop when I heard a voice. "Elena?" I looked up, and there he was. Older, yes, more lines on his face, streaks of silver in his hair, but still unmistakably him. His blue-gray eyes hadn't lost their sharpness. "Mr. Carter?" I stood, smiling. "Wow, I haven't seen you since." "Since you were wearing that awful plaid graduation gown." He chuckled and we hugged. It felt strange familiar, yet entirely new. We sat, ordered coffee, and caught up. He told me he'd left teaching a few years ago, now working at a publishing house in the city. I told him about my work in marketing, my engagement to Daniel, my life in the same small town. The conversation flowed easily until he leaned back, watching me with an expression that was softer, almost wistful. "I don't know if I should say this," he said, lowering his voice, "but I've had dreams about you, Elena, for years." I froze, unsure how to respond. "Not when you were my student," he clarified quickly, his gaze steady. "Only after you graduated. I kept wondering where you were, what you were doing. Sometimes I dream about running into you, talking to you like this? And sometimes," he hesitated, a faint smile touching his lips. "Sometimes the dreams felt real." The air between us thickened. I laughed nervously, sipping my coffee. "That's unexpected." He looked at me as if weighing his next words. "You grew up into someone remarkable. And I'd be lying if I said I hadn't thought about you more than I should." That night, I couldn't sleep. Daniel was away on a business trip, and I kept replaying the look in Mr. Carter's eyes. How it had made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in a long time. We met again 2 days later. He invited me to see his apartment in the city, just to show you some manuscripts I'm editing, he said with a small grin. The apartment was filled with books, papers, and the faint scent of cedar. He poured us wine and we sat on the couch, talking for hours. But eventually the conversation faltered, and the silence between us was electric. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "You're even more beautiful than I remember." I should have walked away. I was engaged. But instead, I leaned into his touch. His lips found mine slowly, deliberately, like he'd been imagining this for years. The kiss deepened, his hand cupping my face, mine resting against his chest where I could feel his racing heartbeat. It wasn't just physical. It was loaded with all the years of unspoken curiosity, of what-ifs, of paths never taken. When I finally pulled back, breathless, I whispered, "We can't." "I know," he murmured, his forehead resting against mine. "But I don't want to stop." What followed was a night of whispered confessions, long glances, and an ache neither of us wanted to name. We didn't cross every line, but we stepped far enough into the gray that my heart would never see Daniel the same way again. In the morning, sunlight streamed into the apartment. He made coffee, handed me a mug, and we stood by the window, watching the city wake up. "You'll marry him?" he asked softly. "I don't know," I admitted. He smiled sadly, brushing his thumb over my knuckles. "Whatever you choose. I'll still dream about you." It had been almost 12 years since I last stepped into the hallways of Riverside High, but that day in the cafe made it feel as if no time had passed. After our first meeting, I tried convincing myself it was nothing, just two old acquaintances catching up. But the truth? Something in me had stirred awake that I thought had been dead for years. 2 days later, he texted Mr. Carter. I found something you wrote in your old senior portfolio. Want to come see it? I stared at my phone for what felt like forever before. Typing back, sure. The second time I visited his apartment, the air between us was already charged. He handed me the folder, and inside was an essay I'd written at 8 and raw, idealistic, full of hope. You always had a way of putting your feelings into words, he said, his voice low. Even back then, you wrote like someone who'd already lived through heartbreak. I laughed softly, flipping through the pages. And have I lived through heartbreak now? He looked at me like he already knew the answer. We talked for hours again about books, music, regrets. But it was the pauses that were dangerous. The moments his gaze lingered too long, the way my hand brushed his when I reached for my wine glass. When I stood to leave, he walked me to the door. We just stood there for a second, staring at each other. I didn't move. He didn't either. Then he stepped closer. I could smell his cologne, faint, clean, familiar in a way that made my knees weak. His hand rose, fingers grazing my jaw. He didn't kiss me, not then. He just said, "You should go," before I do something I've imagined for far too long. I went home, but my mind didn't. Over the next few weeks, we saw each other again and again. Always under some harmless pretense. He had a book to show me. I had an article I thought he'd like. Each meeting stretched the thread of temptation tighter. One rainy Friday, he invited me over after work. Just to wait out the storm, he said. But the storm outside had nothing on the one between us. We sat close on the couch, the sound of rain pounding against the windows. "This is wrong," I whispered, though I didn't move away. He smiled faintly. "Then why does it feel inevitable?" And then, finally, the kiss came slow, searching, like he was learning the shape of my lips by memory. I melted into it, my hands curling into his shirt. Every second was dangerous, but every second also felt like something I had been missing for years. We didn't rush. That was the thing about him. He took his time. Even when our kisses deepened, even when his hands framed my face, he moved. Like he was memorizing every detail. I stayed too long that night. When I finally left, I knew something had changed. I was no longer a woman who could claim she belonged only to her fiancé. The weeks after were a blur of stolen hours. Lunch breaks that ran long, sudden excuses to drive into the city. Late night phone calls that lasted until I fell asleep. One night, he told me, "When I dream about you now, it's not about the past anymore. It's about the future I wish we could have." I should have felt guilty, and I did sometimes. But there was also a thrill in knowing someone wanted me so completely. With a kind of hunger that Daniel hadn't shown in years. It all came to a breaking point one evening in late autumn. We were at his apartment again, the city lights spilling across the floor. I had been pacing, torn between staying and walking out for good. He stopped me, catching my hand. "Elena, if you marry him, I'll never say another word. But if you're hesitating, even for a second, tell me now." The silence was thick. I looked at him, at the man who had been a figure in my past and was now the center of my present. "I don't know what I'm doing," I admitted, my voice trembling. He stepped closer, his forehead resting against mine. "Then let me be the reason you decide." That night, we didn't talk about boundaries. We didn't talk about Daniel. We just existed in that space, hands entwined, lips brushing, the air between us thick with heat and something dangerously close to love. The next morning, I woke to find him watching me. "You'll go back to him, won't you?" he asked quietly. I swallowed hard. "I don't know." He smiled sadly, pressing a kiss to my temple. "Whatever happens, you'll always be in my dreams." I left before noon, but the sound of his voice stayed with me. And in the weeks that followed, no matter how many times Daniel talked about wedding venues and guest lists, I couldn't stop wondering if I'd made the right choice. Or if the right choice was still waiting for me in a city apartment full of books and unfinished dreams. I tried to go back to normal after that morning. Daniel was kind, attentive even, almost as if he could sense something shifting in me. He brought home flowers, suggested weekend trips, started talking about the honeymoon. I smiled, I nodded, I played the role of the fiancé he thought I was. But at night, lying beside him, my mind wandered back to another bed, one where the sheets smelled faintly of cedar and ink, where the light spilled across my skin differently. I didn't plan to see Mr. Carter again so soon, but temptation has a way of bending logic. 3 days later, I found myself standing outside his apartment, again telling myself I was only there to return a book. When he opened the door, he didn't say a word. He just looked at me, really looked, and I felt my breath catch. Then he stepped aside. "I told myself I wouldn't call you," he said as I walked in. "But I knew if you showed up, I wouldn't send you away." We sat close on the couch, knees almost touching. The conversation started innocent updates about work, mutual friends from years ago, but our voices kept dropping. Our gazes lingering. At one point, I reached for my coffee, and my fingers brushed his. He didn't pull back. Neither did I. The silence after was heavy, like we were both waiting for the other to make the first move. "Do you remember," he asked finally, "that day in your senior year when you stayed after class to talk about your essay?" I nodded slowly. "You were so serious, so determined. But when you smiled," he trailed off, his eyes on my lips. "That smile stayed with me for years. I used to imagine what it would be like if you looked at me like that again." I should have stopped him. I should have stopped myself. Instead, I leaned in. The kiss this time was hungrier, more certain. His hand slid to my waist, pulling me closer, and I felt the rest of the world fade. The sound of traffic outside, the hum of the fridge, it all disappeared until there was only the warmth of his mouth, the press of his chest against mine. When we finally pulled apart, my pulse was racing. He rested his forehead against mine, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't keep pretending I don't want you." The weeks that followed blurred into a rhythm-secret text, fleeting meetings, the ache of parting followed by the rush of reunion. One evening I told Daniel I had to work late. Instead, I ended up in Mr. Carter's kitchen, sitting on the counter while he cooked. We shared wine and laughter, but there was an undercurrent to everything, a constant awareness that what we were doing was dangerous. At one point, he stood between my knees, tucking a stray strand of hair behind my ear. "You know," he murmured, "this isn't just about wanting you. I care about you more than I should." I didn't know how to respond, so I kissed him instead, and the conversation dissolved into something wordless. The guilt started creeping in after that. Little things, Daniel's arm around me at a friend's dinner party, his excited chatter about the wedding photographer made my stomach twist. But every time I tried to end things with Mr. Carter, I couldn't. I'd start to say the words, and then he'd look at me in that way that made me feel seen, known, wanted in a way I hadn't felt in years. And so it went on, 2 lives running parallel, never meant to touch, yet tied together by a thread that kept pulling me back. The night it all came to a head was cold, the streets slick with rain. I had gone to see him, telling Daniel I was meeting a friend. But the moment I walked through the door, I knew this was different. He looked at me like a man on the edge. "Elena," he said, his voice rough, "tell me right now, are you marrying him?" I hesitated, my throat tight. "I don't know." He took a step closer. "If you're going to choose him, I need to let you go before I lose myself completely." Something inside me broke at those words. I closed the distance, my hands on his face, and kissed him with everything I'd been holding back. The kiss was desperate, almost bruising, and when we finally pulled apart, both of us were breathing hard. "I don't want to lose you," I whispered. His eyes searched mine like he was trying to decide if he could believe me. "Then don't." I left his apartment in the early hours, the city still and quiet around me. In my chest, 2 truths fought for space. 1, that I was engaged to a man who loved me, and 2, that I was in love with another man entirely. And as I lay in bed beside Daniel that night, listening to his steady breathing, I knew the story wasn't over. Not yet. The next morning, I told myself I wouldn't call him. I kept busy, answered work emails, cleaned the apartment, even made Daniel's favorite pasta for dinner. But in the back of my mind, I kept hearing Mr. Carter's voice, low and steady, telling me not to lose him. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his hands on me, his mouth tracing paths along my skin, the way his eyes darkened when I said his name. By dawn, my resolve had broken. I texted him just 2 words, "Come over." When he arrived, I didn't even let him take his coat off before I kissed him. It was clumsy at first, all teeth and urgency, but then it slowed, deepened. His hands framed my face like he was memorizing me. "You're going to ruin me," he murmured against my lips. Maybe I already had. We didn't make it to the bedroom. The couch, the hallway wall, the kitchen counter, they all became places where the world outside didn't exist, where the only thing that mattered was the heat between us afterward. We sat tangled in each other, our breathing slowly returning to normal. He brushed his thumb over my cheek and whispered, "I don't just dream about you, Elena. I waited for you. All these years." The days blurred after that. Every time Daniel left for work early, I'd find myself texting Mr. Carter. Sometimes we'd just talk about books, music, the little things that didn't seem important, but somehow felt like they were ours alone. Other times, the conversation would turn and soon he'd be at my door, pulling me against him before we'd even spoken a word. The risk became part of the thrill. Once, he kissed me in the stairwell of my building, his hand sliding under my coat, knowing Daniel could be home at any moment. Another time, we spent an entire afternoon in his bed while the rain fell outside. The sound a steady drumbeat to the way he whispered my name. But guilt has sharp edges. One night, Daniel came home early. I was still wearing the dress I'd worn to Mr. Carter's place hours earlier. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, kissing my shoulder. "You smell different," he said softly. My heart nearly stopped. I laughed it off, saying I'd tried a new laundry detergent. He believed me at least. I think he did. That night, I lay awake, wondering how long I could keep balancing on this razor-thin line. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. Daniel was away on a business trip, and Mr. Carter invited me to his lake cabin, a place I didn't even know he owned. It was quiet there, the air sharp with winter cold. Inside, the fire crackled, and he poured me a glass of red wine. We talked for hours, but there was an unspoken heaviness between us, something hovering just beyond the words. When I finally asked him what was on his mind, he set his glass down and took my hands. "I can't do this halfway anymore. I need to know if I'm waiting for something real, or if I'm just keeping you warm until your wedding day." The question hit like a blow. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stood and walked to the window, staring at the reflection of the 2 of us in the glass. "I don't want to marry him," I admitted finally, my voice trembling. "But I don't know how to break him like that." He came up behind me, his arms wrapping around my waist. "Then let me be the one you choose, completely." That night, we didn't just fall into each other's arms, we sank. Every touch was slower, more deliberate, as if we both knew this was the night that would change everything. His mouth moved over my skin like a confession, his hands steady but desperate, like he was afraid I might vanish. When we finally lay together, the fire burning low, he whispered, "Stay." And for the first time, I thought I might the next morning. I didn't rush home. I stayed long enough to watch the lake turn gold in the sunrise, long enough to feel the weight of what we'd done settle deep in my bones. I knew a choice was coming. And for the first time, I was starting to see what my answer would be. 2 days later, I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my phone. Daniel had sent me a picture from his trip, a shot of him smiling in front of some corporate building. I forced myself to reply with a heart emoji, even as my mind was still in the cabin, still on the feeling of Mr. Carter's hands gripping my waist, still on the way he'd said stay. That afternoon he texted me, "We need to talk." Those 4 words set my nerves on fire. We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe on the edge of town, a place where no one would know us. When I arrived, he was already there, a coffee in front of him, untouched. He looked different. Not cold exactly, but guarded. Elena, he began. I meant what I said at the cabin. But there's something you don't know. My heart lurched. What is it? He took a breath. I didn't find you by accident. I've been keeping tabs on you for years. I froze. What do you mean? He looked down at his coffee, then back at me. I knew where you worked. I knew who you were with. I knew about Daniel before. You ever told me... I didn't reach out because I thought it was fate. I reached out because I couldn't stop myself. The words felt like they were tilting the ground beneath me. So, this... I gestured between us. All of this was planned. Not planned, he said quickly. Hoped for. Dreamed of. But yes, I made sure we crossed paths again. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Every kiss, every whispered word, every promise at the cabin suddenly felt shadowed by the possibility that I'd been living inside someone else's obsession. I stood to leave, but his hand shot out, catching mine not rough, but desperate. I love you, he said. Even if it started this way, it's real now, you know it is. That night, I drove home in silence. Daniel was already back, sitting on the couch with a beer in hand, grinning as if nothing had shifted in my world. But something had. When he kissed me hello, I didn't feel guilt this time. I felt control because maybe Mr. Carter thought he had orchestrated the story. Maybe Daniel thought he knew the woman he was marrying. But I'd already decided neither of them knew the real ending yet. A month later, I was gone. No wedding. No goodbye. No forwarding address. Somewhere out there, I imagine Mr. Carter still searching for me. Somewhere else, Daniel was probably wondering what he'd missed. And me? I was standing at the edge of a different lake in a different town, watching the water ripple under a new name, a new life. Because love, obsession, guilt, they're all the same thing when you learn how to hold the pen. And I was done being anyone's character.